Hello again. This is Altalena, and welcome back to An Aesthetic Education. I am delighted to say that today we're joined by Beau Morrow. Beau is a graphic designer and owner of Left Hand Designs, a specialized design company based in Austin, Texas. Throughout his career in the design world, Beau has worked with a plethora of people, all searching for that aesthetic spark to help their businesses grow. Everybody from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. So I'm especially delighted that we get to have a little bit of an insight and a little bit of an extra interest into the design world, but also from the business perspective as much as from the artist perspective. So, Beau, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome to An Aesthetic Education. How you doing today?
Doing great, man.
Awesome,
Thanks for having
awesome.
me.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. So, as I'm sure you might be aware, we like to start off some of these interviews with just like a little walk down memory lane. So, I'd love if
Mhm.
you can kind of tell our listeners just what are some of your earliest memories of the point where you were first interested in art or drawing or creativity. How did that come about in your own world, in your own life?
Sure, yeah. For me, started definitely in grade school. I don't know that I had a super artistic family, so to speak, but my grandpa had a very artistic kind of style. He dealt in like antiques and stuff, and somehow I got the creative brain, I think, from him. And then slowly just like kind of figured out that I was gravitating towards kind of the art world in like elementary school, and then in middle school when you start getting in electives and stuff, I was taking art in there. And then high school and went to college for it. So it's always been, kind of ingrained in me. I was never like the strongest drawer or painter or any of that stuff, but I could get around in it. But it's kind of like when I was introduced. I'm a real techie guy. My dad is a software engineer, and when I was introduced, I remember playing with like Microsoft Paint for the first time. I was like, oh my god, this is cool. So just the combination of art and technology really kind of sucked me in. And from there I just you know that's just kind of been my medium. So
Yeah, I find it interesting. So, in the sense, and we've had this conversation with a few other people before, but you had access to art at school in some form, right?
mhm, yeah.
So, what did that kind of, was it sort of a big art program? Was it supportive, or was it just sort of just little opportunities here and there?
Are we talking about grade school or college?
Yeah, well, grade school. I mean, I would say maybe let's look at high school through college.
High school through college, yeah. So high school they had a pretty decent program for what they offered. There was drawing and painting and stuff. So probably a little more advanced. I actually went to two different high schools, one in California and then the other one here in Austin. The one in California was definitely more, you could take, you know, painting and like drawing and like individual, like very specific art classes. And then when I moved here, it was just kind of your general art one, two.
Yeah.
Um, but then in college, I went to Texas State, and they have a really good design program. So, I graduated with a communication design degree, and they take you through. I mean, you start off with like taking art history classes, almost minor than that, and they take you through, all the drawing and painting. And, I think I even took like a fibers class. You take really weird stuff as a fine art degree, but, and then I got into the design stuff. So,
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at that sort of journey, right, you had exposure to a lot of different types of art, as you said, different
yep.
mediums, different things like that. So, but you said obviously the tech side inspired you, and obviously also the tech world and art as tech has changed so much in the last 20 years. So
Sure.
what was it like when you first sort of started? When you, I mean, you obviously had Microsoft Paint, but when you sort of got exposed maybe to Adobe for the first time,
Right.
and just sort of what was it about that sort of creative portal almost that excited you and allowed you to sort of do things that you couldn't do with painting, let's say, or something like that?
Sure. Yeah. It gave me a new medium to work with. The ideas artistically were always in my head, creatively, in my head. But I felt like the computer, I was kind of able to pull those ideas out in a medium that I felt comfortable with. First time I used Photoshop was in it's probably like 2001 or 2000 maybe. Got 2001 in college. Got the old bubble iMac back in the day.
Yeah.
Got my first version of pirated Photoshop, and it was like, game changer.
Mm.
That first class when I was learning all this stuff, just, more technique driven. It was so eye opening to me. I knew like, that's where I wanted to be. And so yeah.
So where, thinking about then your own style of
Hmm.
art and we'll get into the design elements and what you do for businesses in a minute, but thinking about just like if you're just kind of playing around, let's say, on the computer, how would you sort of what draws you in? What sort of style do you like to put out there and what do you kind of consider um what inspires you, I guess is the best way to say it, to create some of those pieces?
Sure. It's all kind of inspired by things that I relate to and that I like, or the ones that, they're kind of like, um, you're a little more passionate about. I tell clients all the time, if they're, they have a business or a product or something that, I can really relate to, then I'm able to just kind of like ingrain myself into that. It's a lot different doing a logo or branding for like, a brewery than it is
Mhm.
maybe like a law firm, even though I do both.
Yeah.
I relate more to the breweries than I do a law firm. Um, but it's just yeah, I mean, it's just yeah.
Yeah, step by step, I think is a great way to
Yep.
look at it. Um, so so have you, I mean, thinking about just motivation, what artists have you sort of looked at maybe out there? I said you said that you briefly studied art history, you were maybe going to minor in it. What sort of artists have really motivated you, or just given you, you're like, wow, that's amazing. I wish I could incorporate some of their elements into my own work. Just in terms of style and things like that.
Sure. It's a good question. So, you know, I don't like the one that pops out to me that I've always been a huge fan of, even like going back to college, is Roy Lichtenstein.
Hmm.
Just like the pop art style, the fact that he was able to kind of create this almost machine made looking art, just with like, traditional paint. And it's that style just like really resonated in me. I took a screen printing, like printmaking class in college, and we learned like, uh, screen printing, scratch board, lithograph. Like we did all that. And I did several Liechtenstein inspired pieces in that class, kind of like, working through that process. So I would say him. And my art today doesn't, it's not really super relatable to the types of stuff he does. Every now and then, like I'll kind of dip into that style, but it's something that I've always been drawn to.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you ever just think about, excuse me, do you ever just think about creating something Roy Lichtenstein inspired just for yourself?
Uh, Absolutely. I just, these days it's more for like lack of time.
Yeah.
I'm a busy dude. I got, you know, a 3-year old and a 7-year old at the house too. they keep us super busy. So
Yeah.
it's life is hectic right now.
Yeah.
Um,
As
but
always, right?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we've kind of touched on this already, but maybe you could just kind of walk through it. So you went to college, you studied that communication design. Sounds like it was an amazing experience. So how did you sort of go from gaining obviously the skills, the knowledge, the familiarity with design, with the computing side of things, and all those different pieces to, basically making that your career as a graphic designer and then eventually starting your own company, right left hand design, um, and really sort of then branching out on your own business.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, through college, you kind of learn all the foundational stuff. You're given kind of mock clients that you produce projects for, which are great exercises. Um, and then, you design everything from ads to logos to, stationery and brochures and stuff like that. And I think that that is done just to see where you kind of gravitate towards, at least in the program that I was in. And so once you get out, you kind of find your strengths and weaknesses. Your first job out of college is typically with like, either a small design firm or an ad agency. Mine was with an ad agency. And, you're usually brought in as kind of an entry level designer or, studio artist. And then you're kind of in that stage, you're working through the technical aspects of it. You're getting to know kind of like what a creative brief is and what you're getting direction from like art directors and, you know, um, all that kind of stuff. And you're also at the same time learning the technical aspects of what you need to know, like, you know, um, prepping jobs for like print and types of printing and, like all of this other stuff. And then from there, you kind of get to know how the workings of an agency go. The agency that I started with was like 50-person shop. From there, I moved on to another place that was like, like a 10-man shop. And so, and then I had an internship at another firm here in Austin that had like at one time 700 employees, which is like
Wow.
crazy.
That's insane.
So I got to see it from all spectrums. And then from there, I was able to decipher kind of what I wanted to be, especially when I got down into that small shop and I was doing the majority of the work.
Mm,
It's like, man, I need to be doing this for myself,
yeah.
and at that point when, I was like art director, designer, wearing a lot of hats there, but when you're going into the meetings and you're talking through all of the stuff before the art actually starts happening, I kind of figured out I could do it for myself. And
Yeah.
so I freelanced from like '03 to '08, and then in '08 I went fully on my own, and I've been doing it ever since. So,
Wow.
and it's very much a learning process, just like
Mm,
everything else. I learn something every day. At this point, like, I love making mistakes at this point in my career because you learn from them, you never do them again, and then you can kind of talk to and teach somebody else not to make those same mistakes. So,
yeah.
yeah,
I think that's amazing. I think it's a fascinating world to be in the sense that not a lot of people, we all look at the work of graphic designers pretty much every day in some form. But people don't really recognize that or really necessarily appreciate just kind of the complexities and the process that goes into the creation of these pieces every single time. Um, it's I think one of those little niche industries in a way that is vital and yet often just not thought about, which I guess in some ways is a compliment because if you're making an ad, right, you don't really want people to feel like it's an ad, right?
right, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of background that goes into, any type of art that is just like not really seen when people look at the final piece. You know what I mean? There's a lot that goes into uh, just the background of that, many later layers.
Yeah, I was wondering also just in terms of thinking about it really from the, I know a lot of people listening to this will be interested in the business aspect. When you decided to obviously set up your own shop at that point, you'd been doing it for, a fair amount of time. Were you, I mean, you're obviously nervous in the sense that it's a new industry and you're trying to break into as a sole practitioner basically. But I mean, did you come in with a lot of clients already that you had been doing long-term projects for, or was it sort of like a blank slate at that stage?
Yeah, so it was kind of all over the place. I can tell you like the it's funny the way that how life drags you in one position to just
Yeah.
kind of like get your foundational stuff set. For me, I was doing a lot of work, mostly like logo and brand type stuff, freelance, and then this client that turned into a client of mine for like many years reached out to me. Is like, can you design like mail pieces?
Mm.
I was like, yeah, I could probably do that. And this guy's a political consultant.
Mm.
I'm the least political person you've ever met, so I had no relation to that. But um, so I started designing these mail pieces for him, and five turned into 10, turned into 50, turned into 100, and he's got like a bunch of different clients, and then those clients reaching out to me, and then before I knew it, I had this like political mail piece design company, that was like basically kind of holding the left hand design afloat while I was
Mm.
doing more the type of work that I wanted to do on the side, which was like branding, right?
Yeah.
So that was just kind of like my path into it. From there, I met a lot of people like non-political people who were
Mm.
like starting businesses and stuff. So I was able to get my foot in the door, doing branding for these other companies, and from there it just kind of grew organically from that.
Yeah.
Um, yep,
Yeah, I think it's always interesting how these businesses begin to then take on a life of their own. So obviously at this point you're doing the work that you want to be doing, right? You get to kind
correct,
of pick the projects in the sense that if people come to you, if you're not interested in it, you don't have to take it, right? Um,
right.
so I mean, how do you sort of balance that? So when somebody approaches you, right, and as you said, you've worked with everybody from law firms to breweries, to myself, obviously. Um, how do you sort of, because as you say, you might not be that interested in the law firm logo, but how do you sort of compartmentalize, I guess, the choices and what you decide to take on?
Sure. So I can tell you when I was doing it all myself, my brother Paul works with me now, and he has for the last like 5 or 6 years. Before Paul was on, and I was doing everything. I was not saying no a lot, which
Yeah,
kind of got me into trouble. I think other designers can definitely relate to this, but you're strapped for time. You're saying yes to everything. You're going through rounds and rounds of revisions that are overlapping each other. And I think through that process, and everybody kind of needs to go through that to learn.
mm,
Okay, I don't need to take all this on. Let's focus on what I want, and then you start asking yourself what kind of projects and clients do I want to be working on, and then those that's how you kind of market yourself, via online social media,
yeah,
all that stuff. You kind of like hone in on one area, right?
yeah.
That's yeah.
Is it something in terms of I mean, do you? I know obviously Paul's been working on this now, as you said, for 5 or 6 years. When
Mhm.
you talk with your brother about it, do you really think about it in terms of your messaging on social media to try and attract the clients, or is that more just Paul's domain? Is that kind of his prerogative in that sense?
Right, yeah. So I kind of lean on Paul. Paul's like uh front of the house for lead
Yeah.
paint design. So he's, taking all the calls and stuff. And so we kind of talk it over, and he, like, having him as that filter makes it a little bit easier for me to say no. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so we really do, like, I don't absolutely love every project that I work on. I do like all the clients that I work with. We're really
Yeah.
blessed to, like, just have good people that we work with. um but yeah, it's, not all projects,
Sure. Speak to
you know what I'm
your,
saying.
yeah, speak to your
Right,
artistic soul necessarily.
right.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Kind of segues into the next question I was hoping to ask you, which is, it's this is a commercial venture, obviously,
Mhm.
and graphic design is particularly commercially focused. But you do obviously have, you've studied art, you've been an artist for a long time, and you have your own aesthetic beliefs and aesthetic choices. So, what are some of those considerations? What are some of those like must-have things that no matter what the project is, it could be, like I said, a biotech company or my own company, right, which is more art focused. What are some of those things that you always want to include one way or another that will make the logo or the brand have some sort of aesthetic spark?
Sure. So I kind of learned this over time, but it's you really truly have to understand the client. And the client is always going to have, or a lot of times going to have, an opinion of what they want.
Yeah.
What they want is not always what's going to be the best for them. So it's going to be kind of up to you to talk that through with them. I think the target audience is another thing that is super important to know, and to kind of, like, talk through with your client, and then figure out a good solution artistically for to kind of find a nice harmony and all that, right?
Yeah.
And then, you know just walk the client through kind of the process and how it works. And yeah, I'm kind of trailing off there, but
No, you're good. You're good. I think it's interesting. Obviously, we've gone through a few various things together. Um, working on logos designs and other things like that. Um, I think it's what I was always so impressed with and what I really enjoyed doing with us and our the whole process that we went through was the fact that I had a vision and you were able to understand the vision and then actually make it practical, right? Because as somebody who doesn't necessarily have an artistic ability of any note, um, it's hard to sort of know what you're thinking in your head and then actually how does that become a reality,
right. Yeah, for
you know?
sure.
So I think that was what was most impressive and really most pleasing about the whole process. I mean, and we can just this is just a little segue, but talking about the Altalena logo, that was obviously heavily inspired by the Vienna Werkstatt, right? The Vienna workshop that happened at the turn of the 19th century. In 20th century. So, I mean, you obviously hadn't, I'm guessing you didn't know too much about that when I came with that particular group to you, right?
I didn't know.
No.
No.
So, but aesthetically you saw, I mean, can you just sort of talk me through briefly what you saw like with the little logos that we looked at and things like that and how you were able to kind of, make that a bit more modern?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, with the project like yours and a lot of other projects that I work on, there's some form of inspiration that comes from that, whether it's like from other art, or some photography, or it could come from a number of different things. Um, and then figure out what kind of the end goal for that is, and just find a solution that is going to work, um, for many, many years down the line. That's going to be effective both um, for for branding purposes for the client, and then
Mm,
kind of on the technical side, how are you using that logo? Where is it going to go? All of that stuff, and then taking all that into consideration in
sure.
in putting your branding together.
Yeah. What are the differences? And we've all been thinking about this in this new tech world that we live in. What are some of the differences that you really think about in terms of like online versus print, when trying to come up with a brand? Like if it's mostly going to be used on paper, it's obviously going to look different to social media.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, anything on the web is typically more vibrant
Mm,
than print, unless you're printing with like Pantone colors and that kind of stuff. If you're using like Pantone colors, you want to be limited in those, because if you're trying to print like say a poster with 12 colors, depending on the client, it can get like pretty costly. So
yeah.
those are things that you got to kind of keep in mind. Um, Print and web, like, if someone's printing like say for a logo and brand, they want this, like I'm working with a client right now that wants like all fluorescent
Mm,
colors. It's like a graffiti type
yeah.
brand, right? And I explained to them early you know, on web, it's always going to look great. It's going to look fluorescent. But in order for that to look fluorescent in print, you got to be printing with Pantone colors. But they're going to be printing like four color, like CMYK brochures, which
Mm,
will muddy it up those colors. So there's kind of like all this like technical
yeah.
know-how behind that, between the print and web, CMYK versus RGB and all that stuff, which kind of like it goes over a lot of clients' heads, and I kind of nerd out on that stuff, um, but it's important to know
Mm.
from the get go, how that's going to translate to both print and web.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it in terms of kind of, like woodcuts, things like that.
Sure. Yep.
When, back in the day when people would sort of do those styles of printing and now obviously, today it's kind of mostly if you do it nicely, I guess you can do a nice screen print. Um, and things like that, depending on what you're actually trying to make, I suppose. But I think it's interesting in the sense that it's very, I mean, as you say, the technical knowledge required to understand how it works is very high. Most people either don't have the time or the interest necessarily in trying to figure that out. Um, and it's kind of like, yeah, you need to be that encyclopedia of knowledge so that when somebody comes with this vague notion to you, you're able to make it a reality.
For sure. And another thing that I have to be aware of, like when I'm starting a logo, um, every logo that I create, if I want it to be effective for my client, it's got to translate to black and white. It's got to be able to translate to one color. It's crazy. Like, I mean, you can look at a ton of logos out there, a lot of them with like gradients and stuff that they just won't translate. And
Mm,
some of my clients like that used to have logos like that, they don't realize that they have a logo that just doesn't work for them until like a year or two down the line.
yeah.
um, but they've already sunk like $10,000 on a sign, and like all this other money, and then they're like, oh wait, we're trying to embroider polos and we have
Mm,
this logo that so it's
yeah.
like there's all that kind of knowledge that goes in the very beginning to just get something that works for them moving forward.
Yeah. When people come to you and like, you've created something for them, you've done the first, the second round of designs and things like that, and they still, they're still not getting it or they're still not happy with it 100%. I mean, how do you kind of deal with that? It might be a personal question, but I'm always fascinated to see because it is aesthetic and it is personal taste ultimately.
Sure.
And sometimes it just might not mesh, right?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So, from the get-go, we communicate that, it's a process, and sometimes the process is quick and sometimes it's long. Um, and when I find myself in kind of a process that's taking a little bit longer, or maybe we're not hitting and we're a couple rounds deep on revisions, then we kind of start dissecting things, and or I do, and I start asking a lot more questions specifically about, you know, what they it, like what they don't like is just as
Mhm.
important as what they do like, right? And
Yeah.
I think as a designer, it's, you have to learn what questions to ask, at what point in the process, to get to where you want to where both of you need to be,
Yeah.
right? So it's just part of the process.
Yeah. I think what I always find nerve-wracking, I guess is the best way to put it, is as you say, you're giving that vision over to somebody else, and that's part of that piece. So it is, as you say, that complicated back and forth. But
Mhm.
yeah, knowing what you don't like is obviously just as important as knowing what you do like, because sometimes people don't even know what they like, honestly.
Sure. Yeah.
Which makes it really difficult at that point. So just trying to
Yeah.
think about, yeah, okay, go for it.
Yeah. I also find that, sometimes, people are different, right? So
Mm,
overcomplicating it in the beginning can lead to a lot of revisions. So, if you're a couple rounds in, you're not seeing eye to eye, then you kind of hone in kind of one element at a time. Maybe
mm,
that's the icon that we're hung up on, right? And
yeah.
what is it about the icon? And you kind of you just go through the motions to get that nailed down. All right, let's get the icon in a good spot, and then we'll
Mm,
explore typography. Right.
yeah.
I always do colors last.
Yeah.
It's a full exploration of colors. I don't want people to get caught up on colors in the get go. A lot of
Mm,
people do.
yeah.
So that's just like it's kind of part of my process to simplify things for the client from the get go.
Yeah. I mean, obviously that's a very collaborative process. Um,
Mm-hmm.
do you collaborate with other artists, other graphic designers, for certain projects, or is it very much a solo practice at that point?
Yeah, so for a long time it was solo, and there's no reason for that other than, I was just taking on a lot of projects that I felt were in my wheelhouse
Mm,
and turning down the ones that I didn't, that weren't, right?
yeah.
And then probably about 4 years ago or so, I started kind of reaching out to other designers because I found that I was turning down a lot of work that,
Mm,
and some of them like really cool projects, or a lot of them actually. And so I really started collaborating with other like illustrators who are much more talented than I am on the illustration level. And and then I've also got like web developers and photographers and uh and all that. But I have a couple other designers that I work with. And so, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, I've been collaborating a lot more over the last like 4 years or so.
mm. Yeah, I mean, this has been a running theme as well in a lot of the conversations that I've been having so far, which is that in the art world today, it really has become rather individualistic, in the sense that artists don't really go out of their wheelhouse too often, and they don't work with other people, and they don't exchange ideas as often as they used to. Groups of artists don't really come together in the same form, like we've talked about with the Wiener Werkstatt, or even the Impressionists, or people like that, who obviously had manifestos and beliefs and practices and all this stuff. And I think it's interesting because I would say that in graphic design, you obviously used to also kind of see that more, with that whole collaborative space. Um, but do you think I mean, obviously you went out by yourself, but did you have a bit more of that sense when you worked in these bigger companies, although maybe not so much in the company that had 700 people?
Right. I was always just kind of like tunnel vision, when it came to that. I was always kind of aware what everybody else was doing. Um, but at the time when I was like growing as a designer, I was like really honed in on my craft and not trying to collaborate too much. And I think as you grow, there's part of me that wishes I probably would have started collaborations earlier. And I know other designers that just like started out that way. Everybody does it different. I don't
Yeah.
think there's a right or a wrong way to do it. It's just like however you want to do it. But I'm glad that, you know, uh, 4 years ago or whatever, I started reaching out to other artists because I've taken on projects that I never would have touched back in the day. And some of those projects have turned out to be really cool and, really happy clients and good relationships along the way. And
Yeah.
so the collaborations, it's cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I dig it.
Awesome. So when you hit a roadblock, right? When you have that sort of creative, brick wall in front of you that you're like, this is just not happening right now. What do you do? What are some of the tricks that you've sort of picked up to kind of break through that?
Yeah. Um, it's, it changes. I think what I've learned is, if I'm at that block, then I just like I turn that switch off and
Mhm.
I get up and I walk out and I
Yeah.
just like kind of get away from it, do something else. When I go to kind of reapproach that, I'm reapproaching it in like downtimes when I'm not working in my office. So
Mhm.
I may be just, cooking dinner or having a beer on the back patio or, driving, and I'll just kind of start thinking about, all right, let's figure this out, start sketching some ideas or whatever. I feel like removing myself from, my day-to-day workspace,
Mm.
helping me clear my mind is kind of what helps me with that. And then once I get there, I can kind of like, dig into some inspiration too, for from other designers, from movies. I mean, I get inspiration from everywhere. But I think like just, you know, opening my eyes and removing myself, is what kind of gets me, you know, on some new roads to
Yeah.
find the solution to the graphical problem that I'm facing.
Yeah. I mean, do you think about do you consider popular taste? I mean, you sort of get this, I think like there's this trend where all of a sudden kind of I mean, every microbrewery sort of has a, if they're not spending a lot of money on their logo, all their logos kind of look the same.
Right.
Up to a point. I mean, do you sort of consider that fact like, oh, if everybody's trending towards one thing, you kind of go out on left field a little bit, or do you think, no, I gotta stick, somewhere that's recognizable for the business and yada yada yada.
Yeah, you know, um, I think every designer gets caught up in the trends. It's impossible not to. I think that's the cross of, a lot of different artists, right? Um, but you kind of stick to the foundation. The foundation that I know is like kind of um what I was taught in school. Like, the people I've studied, the Paul Rands and the Chermaevs and
Hmm.
like those guys. And I mean, the logos and brands that they created back in the day are like, they're like timeless logos, right?
Yeah.
They stand the test of time. And, when you're working in like a trendy, kind of style, then, it's not necessarily, it's just going to be kind of like a short-lived thing.
Mm.
It may stand the test of time, but, I looked out back to that foundational stuff, the stuff that I learned, the ones who were doing it long before me, and the fact that their stuff still stands up, so I think there's a lot of similarities in that work, that I studied and the work that I do. I
Mm.
see everything and like, um, in shapes and
Mm.
simplicity. I mean, the logo should be a representation of, you know, the company in its simplest form. And, I really try to accomplish that. There's, if you look at the work on my website, you're going to see some of that foundational work that is talked about, and you're going to see a little bit of the trendy stuff. But that stuff kind of comes from the needs of the client and what they want versus what I'm giving them and all that. So there's kind of that aspect to it too. You know, you gotta be a pleaser, you know, to both parties, and but you at the same time you got to do something that's going to last them um, for as long as you can. So
Yeah. What I love about that idea is that there's a sense of art history in that. There's a sense of interconnectedness and evolution, right? It's not a pure revolution every single time. People think that they're reinventing the wheel, but rather it's step by step. And if you do trace, design features back, you can see where they sort of came from,
sure,
which I think is super powerful. So do
yep.
you think that at this point, what are some of the things that maybe you're seeing now or you're working on now that you would expect to last the test of time, that will be as impactful in the next 10 years of design and art and logos and things like that?
Um, like what am I working on now? That's gonna
Yeah, I mean, just sort of elements that you would say you would expect that this will, you know, this might last a bit longer.
sure. So I think you know, I mean, every logo that I create, I want like I don't want to have my client, uh, you know, 10 years from now having to redo it. I know, like, you know, at least from a conceptual standpoint, right? Like
Yeah.
logos are always modernized, um, you know, and modernizing is okay. But you know, if I had it my way, I would like to just like never have my logos rebranded. But I know
Yeah.
that that's, you know, it's not practical. But um, I don't know, man. I think it's just, you know, I kind of go into it with my own methods and um you know, I just want something that's going to stand the test of time for myself and for my clients, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love that idea because ultimately it's the company, right? And the company's got to represent something. Hopefully it's doing well in the next 10 years, right? That the logo
Yeah,
is still going strong, right?
for sure. For sure.
Perfect. Let's just jump into our final sort of quick fire questions, if that's okay. Um, so I just want to know because obviously you're an artist. So an artist, and I think we might have had a little hint maybe of who this might be, but an artist that you would have loved to have seen work in person. Obviously, could
Yeah,
be alive right now or dead or whatever.
sure. 100% Liechtenstein. He's just like, you know, he's my guy. You know, when I was doing the art history and we got into that, I mean, that's the first time I had ever heard of him or seen his work, was in that art history class. And I mean, since then, it's yeah, he's, you know, I've seen his work in museums. You know, I've got some prints at the house, not originals, of course,
Yeah. Not yet.
but
Not yet.
yeah, not yet, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, he'd definitely be my guy.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then if you could only work with one medium for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I'm doing it. The just the pure balance of just like art and tech is just so me. It's just, you know, it's my perfect medium.
Mm,
I don't like, as much as I do like drawing and, you know, all that stuff, I've never been a big painter. Um, but yeah, it's got to be Adobe on the computer, you know, pushing
yeah.
pixels and setting dots in Illustrator. It's, you know, that's my jam.
Yeah. A quick segue before we get to the last question, but what
Sure.
do you make of AI in the art space and in the design space?
Sure. Great question, man. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's so interesting, right? And it's,
Mm,
you don't really know, you know, you could kind of draw theories on where it's going to go. Am I going to
Mm.
be replaced and all this stuff? But I see it as just another tool. I see it as another like plugin for Photoshop or Illustrator where
Mm.
it's just something else that I utilize. And
Yeah.
I don't mess with it. I mess with it a little bit on the photography side.
Mm.
I'm putting up like mock-ups and stuff, or if I'm building like a website, I'm doing placeholder stuff. I haven't really used it for logos. I know, like, it can help spur maybe some ideas if you're feeling stuck. But the tech is just nowhere close to to getting you anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, and then on the writing side, I've got content writers that I work with. That side is, it's a little bit scarier, but the content writers, um, some of them that I work with are using the AI and then, putting their own thing on it. So it's changing things, man.
Mm.
And then there's this whole like, virtual thing where, we got into like NFTs
Yeah.
and all that stuff. Like they peaked out like what, a year or
Hmm.
two ago, and
Oh yeah.
we haven't seen the end of them. I'm sure they're going to come back. And then, the Apple Vision just came out,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
creating like, different spaces. And, it's this Ready Player One
Yeah.
uh, world.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be there. And at some point, whether you like it or not, and then it's like, that world is going to need to be filled with art. And
Yeah.
how is that going to translate? So
Sure.
these are all things that kind of like run around in the back of my mind. So all that to say, I'm not scared of any of it. I bring it like, I try to learn as much as I can.
Mm.
I don't see it as a threat, at least to myself.
Yeah.
I see it as a tool to be able to use.
Sure.
But it is scary. Like, I'm not going to lie about that. Everyone's got
Yeah.
their kind of, thing, but I'm not going to dig into that. I think
Yeah.
it's, it's interesting, and I stay on
Mm.
top of it.
Yeah. I mean, I find that whole thing fascinating. I mean, I'm not, I agree with you. I'm not scared of it in the sense that, no matter what they call it, artificial intelligence, it's really at this stage just a very effective algorithm of learning,
Right.
and a very effective search engine for a lot of things. But it's not creative. It cannot think for itself, and it does not make something that is truly, it still needs a person to create the art. Um,
Sure.
and having a conversation with you as we work through a process to design a logo is a very different experience, obviously, than typing stuff into Chat GPT or Midjourney or whatever it is, and it regurgitating something back at you. Um,
Right.
so I think that, as you say, it's not something that's like in this form, it's not going to replace anything. How this develops and everything else, I mean, we'll wait and see, and we'll watch on with fascination like everybody else. But
Sure.
it's definitely interesting. The NFT thing, I mean, that was the biggest bubble in the art world
Yeah.
for a while, that's for sure. But
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
see. I mean, all those people that bought those board monkey things or whatever, and you know,
Yeah.
crypto this and
Yeah.
crypto that. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating. But
It really is. I think, and the AI stuff, it's, I want to stay on top of it,
mm,
mainly because I'm kind of interested in it.
sure.
Like I said, a couple times, I'm like super techie, so it interests me. So I read into it, and Adobe is like really integrating it
Yeah.
into their software, and I mean, even on like the I think the Illustrator stuff is probably a little more behind than the
Hmm.
Photoshop AI, but some of
Yeah.
the AI stuff they're doing right now is really impressive, and I'm able to use it. Not so much creatively, but it
Sure.
works. It takes away some of just like the you
Yeah.
know the the boring like kind
Yeah,
of stuff that would take
that's
me
what I was gonna
20 minutes
say.
to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's a tool that you can
Yeah.
use, like all those selection pieces and things like that, that
Right.
it can actually recognize what's in the picture instead of, you having to pinpoint everything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Cool
I
stuff
love
though.
that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating. I mean, we'll have to when something big happens, we'll bring you back on and we'll do an analysis of what this means for everybody. But
There we go.
but then just to get to our very, very last question. So, just thinking about your own work, and I think you've kind of touched on this already, but what is the feeling that you really want people to leave with after seeing one of your pieces, one of the logos, one of the, drawings, something that you've created?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I want anything that I create to draw a reaction out of someone, whether that reaction is like, um, you know, it could be anything.
Mm,
I think if you're able to create an art that's able to create a reaction of somebody, then you did your job, right? Um, but it means I want different things for different projects that I work on. For my logos, like I want them to be timeless. I want them to last forever. I don't want them to ever have to be redone. Maybe they're refreshed, but conceptually I want them to stay the same, right?
yeah,
Um, so that's probably timeless. Timelessness is probably my thing.
awesome.
Mine, yeah,
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I appreciate, you coming on and us having this discussion, and all the work that we have done together, and that we're still doing it's very exciting. And there's more to come, I'm sure. But, but,
absolutely.
but thank you, Beau. I really, really appreciate it. And I'll be putting all of the links to your website, your socials. They'll all be in the description of this episode.
Awesome. Much appreciated. It's been a pleasure, man.
Awesome. Thank you, Beau.
You bet.
If you enjoyed this show, please give us a follow on your preferred podcast listening platform, as well as on Instagram or Facebook, where you can find us under altalena.art. A link to this week's podcast can also be found on our website, altalena.art/aesthetic education. If you are interested in seeing more of Beau's work or partnering with Left Hand Design in your next project, the links to his website and social media can be found in the description of this episode. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to welcoming you back real soon.